Hi, everyone. This is Jim Pikarski, and I give meditation instruction and Dharma talks at Blue Lotus Meditation Center in Venice, Florida. Today, we're going to talk about the creation of the ego. So, it's extremely important to understand what the ego is. The ego starts with a set of understandings that we have that helps us differentiate ourselves from the environment. Knowing where our body is in space, being able to set boundaries. We know what we feel compared to someone else and our responsibilities. All that's part of our ego. So it's built up through life to help us function. It's based on actual experiences and points us to a practical functionality. So it's not, it is a useful conceptual construct. And that is all. It's not an entity, it's just a construct. So it's an abstraction. It's something that is that we build up over time, and somehow, when we're building these ideas of who we are up, we make it into an entity, not just something that helps us move through the world. So we have a self-image, and this is a very useful idea. For instance, your gender, your age, your likes and dislikes, tendencies, challenges, skills. It's all helpful for us to know this stuff. But they are conceptual categories. We mistake it for a self. And because of this mistakenness for a self, it creates a lot of problems for us. So we take this fictional entity that we create out of thought, and we make it into something that we believe is real. One of the problems is that how this takes place is that the I starts identifying with the body. So our I concept is, we say things to ourselves like, I'm going to die, I am tired, I am sick. This is the I concept. The things I just said are really tied to the body. But sometimes we talk like it is separate from the body. My body aches. And when we say my body aches, it's like we are some other entity besides the body that has a body. So it's a little confusing. Are we the body, or are we this entity that has the body? Basically, both those things are conceptual. So they don't have a fundamental reality. We grasp onto this concept of ourselves. So once we create it, and once we start believing we're an entity, we grasp onto it. And that means that we really hold on to it tightly. Another way you could see this is like the automobile industry. The automobile industry is a abstraction. It's all the dealerships, people selling their cars on the internet, manufacturing of cars, people making tires for cars, all this stuff. But if you said, go talk to the auto industry, who would you go talk to? Would you talk to a CEO of a company that made tires for the auto industry? Would you talk to the person down the street who's selling their car on Craigslist? There is no auto industry as an entity. It's just a conceptual category that takes in all these different factors. And this is the same thing about the self. The self is just a conceptual category that takes in all these different things we know about our existence. So the ego is basically a conceptual construction, so it means it's made of thought. And because it's made of thought, this creates certain problems. So because it's made of thought, it takes on the characteristics of thought. And thought has certain characteristics that give the ego identity serious problems. One problem is that thought is dualistic. Okay, being dualistic means that there's always an opposite to everything that we think. So if we're good, then we can be bad. If there's up, there's down. If there's forward, there's backward. If there's right, there's left. So because thought is dualistic, it's very difficult for us to pinpoint ourselves. If I take myself to be a good person, and that's part of my ego identity, then I activate a fear of being a bad person. Well, being a bad person doesn't fit my idea of myself. So it leads to insecurity and ego defensiveness. In psychology, they talk about the defenses as ego defenses. And ego defenses are there to protect our ego. So we get attached to one side of a duality. Oh, I'm smart, I'm good, I'm this, I'm that, I'm special. But the other side of the duality is always implied in that, because it's very difficult to define ourselves in thought without invoking the opposite in some way. So that's one of the problems with the ego, is that it leads to a certain amount of anxiety because we never know if we're that side of the duality. The other thing about thought is separative. So when we use thought, we separate everything out. There's the bed, there's the dresser, there's the picture behind me, there's my glasses, there's the computer I'm talking into. These are all separate things. How are they designated? They're separated out through designation, conceptual designation. So I make concepts, and by making concepts and seeing that these are different things conceptually, then I'm able to focus on them and see them as different things. So, so we take a wholeness, which is our experience, and we separate it into different parts. So one of the things that's created in this is that when we create a separate self, we also create an other. And because the separate self can be vulnerable to the other and separate from the other. And it's really kind of based on a body perspective, because in space, the body is separate from other things, other people. I'm separate from that picture behind me in terms of my body. So this leads to a certain fear and insecurity. We feel separate and disconnected. And because we feel separate and disconnected, we also experience anxiety because we lack wholeness. We're looking for a sense of wholeness. So in a certain way, we long for wholeness. On some level, we understand that we are truly whole. And yet, that is not how our way of feeling due to the fragmentation caused by the ego. So the fragmentation of the ego is because thought separates things. The other thing about thought, and sometimes this creates the most anxiety for us, is thought is ephemeral. Thoughts come and go very quickly. So it's very hard to hold a thought unless you keep reasserting the thought again and again and again. Otherwise, thoughts just flow through our minds and they're there and then they're gone. Now, when we create an idea of a continuous self, but the problem with that idea is that it's made in thought, and these thoughts tend to disappear. And then we have to reassert them again. So this puts us on very shaky ground. We have invested our sense of self in and feel that there's something continuous about our experience, and our experience is continuous. It's like we're always aware of something else is arising in our awareness. But once we make an entity in thought, a thought is not continuous. So we're trying to become something in thought that thought can't hold. Thought can't hold continuity. Thought is always ephemeral. And what happens is that if we're not thinking all the time, we can start having anxiety because we start feeling we don't exist. So one thing we end up doing is feeding the thought stream. We have to keep the thought stream going. And there's a couple ways of keeping the thought stream going. Usually having problems or getting upset about something or getting angry about something, or goals. If I can always be focused on a goal, then I have a sense of continuity because I can reanimate that goal at any particular time. Oh, that's what I'm about. And there's nothing wrong with goals, and all these things can be practical. The problem is that we use them to give ourselves self-assurance. And the other problem is that it creates constant thinking all day long. Matter of fact, if we don't think all day long and we have a period of silence, what will happen is that we'll start feeling very anxious. And then we will probably evoke thought or go, oh God, what am I doing? And some of the people who've meditated may have experienced this. If your mind is silent for too long, you'll get anxious. So the ego is something that is not, we don't have as child. As a child, we just have experience. So we're just awareness and all the sensations that are appearing to us. We haven't separated anything out. We haven't named anything. We haven't, our capacity to use thought is not developed, but our capacity to experience is fully there. So we experience things, but we haven't created thought. And this is basically the innocent state. But as we develop thought over a period of time, we start crystallizing an idea of self called the ego. Ego basically means self. So we crystallize this idea, and as we crystallize this idea, we become more tied to it. We become so tied to it that it becomes our master in a way. And so it's really challenging to look at this, but it's absolutely important because our spiritual freedom depends upon looking at this concept, understanding what it is, and being able to see through it. We can't get rid of the ego, but we can see through it, which is a totally different thing than trying to get rid of it. We're not trying to suppress it. Actually, it is helpful. It's helpful when it's just a functional thought. It's helpful when it's just a practical thought. But when we make it into an entity, it is the source and the center of all our psychological suffering. And, we can go into this more in the future, how this happens. So the next talk I'll give is how we maintain the ego. And we'll talk about that in a little more depth. Thank you.